Wow, wow, wow. I am totally surprised with the abrupt end of that second debate put on by Fox News. They also copyright striked me for covering it the first time and adding my commentary, but I'll leave that aside. Let's give as much as possible unbiased summary here of exactly what was said and what was talked about. These are going to be all of my thoughts put together. So let's get right into it. First, I have to say the moderation in this debate was terrible. I understand it was in partnership with Univision, but it was very difficult to understand one of the moderators. For the first half, there was an echo. It was not a very clearly structured debate. I don't think we got the questions people really care about. Honestly, I think we need politicians to stand there and actually tell us directly, not about things we've been debating for 30 years, but about how we're going to solve the problems at hand right now. We spent very little time on Ukraine. We didn't spend a minute on lowering people's taxes. I mean, there was a brief moment we talked about gas taxes, but that had to do with South Carolina, not the United States. Even though that's in Nikki Haley's plan, that wasn't talked about. We need some more about what people are going to say to Jerome Powell. Are they going to renominate Jerome Powell? Do they agree with what he has done with raising interest rates to the level that they are? We didn't get that. We talked more about farmers than we talked about inflation, and that's no diss to farmers. It's just to say that because of the poor structure, we didn't get to what I think were some of the core and very important elements of what matter to the vast majority of Americans. Anyway, that was just sort of my initial impression, and I kind of had that impression throughout. I was sort of shaking my head like, well, I mean, there's more we could be talking about here, but whatever. It wasn't my debate. So let's go through some of the commentary we got. I really want to start with Nikki Haley. So Nikki Haley, she, without having a professional counter here, just my impression, got the most in. Not only did she get the most language in, but she was definitely coming across as the strongest in tonight's debate. If Vivek was one of the stronger contenders last debate, this debate, everybody made sure to shut him down. They didn't give him a chance to talk. They cut him off. They talked over him. Nikki Haley, she made her arguments pretty clear. Lower taxes, she mentioned that. We never had a discussion about it, but she was one of the few to mention it. Tim Scott later echoed it as well. Get rid of the SALT tax deduction for blue states. Biden's waving the green flag to invite people to cross the border. What this is really a reference to, by the way, is the Venezuelan work permits that are being offered to around 400,000 Venezuelans. And it's really allowing the door to open up to people going to the border saying, yeah, I'm Venezuelan. Or they come to the border and say, yeah, I've been here since before the deadline, because we had a July deadline that you had to be here by to be able to receive that work permit. And the idea is that, well, if, the U.S. government is extending deadlines for those individuals, well, then maybe they'll let me in as well. And that's why maybe there's been a little bit more of an upsurge. Maybe it's more than a little, but anyway, an uptake in the amount of border crossings. And Nikki Haley hits on that. She talks about how if Congress doesn't pass a budget, they shouldn't be getting paid. Very popular sentiment. She talks about how frustrating it is for law enforcement officers to punish individuals by arresting them, but then they get off and they don't actually get prosecuted. Talks about supporting American companies. Talks about making healthcare transparent. And then she gets into like really complicated programs and phrases like certificate of need programs and bringing competition back and dealing with tort law. And honestly, at one point, some people were nicknaming her Wiki Haley because she sounded like she was throwing a dictionary at us. I will say, I understand what she's saying. She wants reform in hospitals and medical situations in America. There's nobody who doesn't. It's just really hard to get any change done in med. It's not saying you shouldn't try, but we've previously tried getting the industry to go to transparent pricing, and it's never gone through. And it's really difficult to get that kind of stuff through. She is correct, by the way. Fact check this. She is correct. More Americans are killed in America, more Americans were killed from fentanyl than Americans were killed during Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq combined. Those wars combined, more Americans are dying to fentanyl. About 150,000 according to the CDC versus 65,000 in all those wars combined. Pretty crazy. She does slam Vivek here. She says, every time I hear you, I feel a bit dumber. I think every single candidate came into this debate trying to figure out, hey, how can we slam Vivek? And that's what they were nailing, especially since we just had a Washington Post editorial. Well, it's a Washington Post opinion piece. It's basically a hit piece. I haven't been able to fully corroborate everything in this, but I did a little bit of work. I'm going to give you the gist of it here. Here's the Washington Post piece. Basically talks about how Vivek received or was in partnership with Chinese companies to build his Reovant business, which is his pharmaceutical business, which has many other sort of Vants under it, which are like little subsidiaries of it. And through this, there were connections made to Hunter Biden and funding for Hunter Biden. This, again, I didn't go as far as being able to corroborate every detail in this piece yet, but what I have done is I went to the investor relations documents of Reovant, and you can find a link between Reovant selling a lot of their partnerships and subsidiaries to Sumitomo. Sumitomo Pharmaceuticals is a Japanese company with a headquarters in China. So really big Chinese connections actually there. And this led a lot of people on stage, especially Nikki at one point, to shout at Vivek, Nikki specifically saying, "We can't trust you." That was probably a big moment there for Nikki. She talks about how a win for China is a win, or a win for Russia in Ukraine is a win for China. This is why she says Vivek wants to just pause where the war is right now. It's worth noting that there's been a lot of talk about this with Ukraine. Why do we think Russia has built minefields and trenches and anti-tank, barricades, the Dragon's Teeth? Why have they built this around the Dnipro and Donetsk region? Well, that's because that's where 90% of the oil and gas production is in Ukraine, which is basically what Russia wants anyway. Nikki goes on to talk about using special forces to go after cartels. She talks about going after China, who's sending the fentanyl in the first place. Talks about 67% of our 8th graders not being proficient in reading and math. This is true, by the way. There was a fight between Haley and Scott for a moment. Basically, Scott was alleging that she spent $52,000 on curtains at a United Nations office. She says while she was there, those curtains were already there, or that spending was already approved. Scott, who was appointed by Haley, which is kind of like this, right? But anyway, Scott argues she says now she wants to eliminate the gas tax, but actually voted to raise the gas tax. That is true, by the way. She did vote to raise the gas tax. However, she only voted to raise the gas tax over 3 years by 10 cents if the state income tax was reduced from 7% to 5% over 10 years. So she saw that as better for her constituents. Going on to Tim Scott, and then we'll get on to Vivek. Tim Scott, very big focus on slamming on Biden about how his bills that he passed when he got into office were all basically bailout tools for unions. He says we need to restore the wall, finish building the wall, restore hope. He argues that Biden's plans are Build Back Broker. And he was actually the one who brought up that Vivek is in business with the Chinese, or at least was. Vivek actually responded to this and says, yes, he was, but he didn't like them, and that's why he got the hell out of China, is what he says. Vivek argues that he's not a big fan of union bosses, but has sympathy for union workers. We'll talk about what Trump has to say about this as well, because it's pretty important. Vivek, once again, repeats some of the things he said before, like eliminate the Department of Education, drill, frack, embrace nuclear energy. He is a big fan of also, rescinding the majority of constitutionally disallowed federal regulations that are hampering our economy. Anyway, he's all for deregulate, capitalism first, fan of Trump, argues that Trump was a great president, he wants to pick up the torch. I thought DeSantis actually had a good point here, where DeSantis is if you get a new president, then you could get somebody who's actually going to be a 2-term president. And this is obviously a slam on Trump, because if Trump comes in, he could only be a 1-term president. Of course, there are some Democrats who argue that if Donald Trump comes back in, we're going to end up having a Trump monarchy, and then it'll be Trump Jr., and other Trumps will take over, and we'll never get rid of Trump, is what some on the left are arguing. It's kind of weird, because it just seems like every election cycle, somebody's like, the elections are going to get rigged and something's going to be, whatever. Okay, so then we've got, from Vivek, we've got talk about how is he going to solve the fentanyl crisis. His biggest argument for solving the fentanyl crisis is sealing the southern border. He calls it a Swiss cheese, a southern border. He didn't really give a clear definition of how he would actually solve the fentanyl crisis. Nikki Haley jumps in here and says, hey, we need special operations crossing the border and taking out these cartels. Vivek says that Mexican cartel members have tunnels that could drive semi-trucks through them. I couldn't find any stat for this. I could only find something that minecarts basically can go through these tunnels, but not semi-trucks. Vivek goes on to argue now that there should be no addictive social media for people under 16 years old. Argues that TikTok is a form of addictive social media, but then he got slammed on stage by others who were like, well, weren't you just on TikTok with Jake Paul? And then Vivek's like, well, we want to reach younger voters, and we should all be focusing on getting a Republican in office because Democrats suck, is a gist of what he was basically trying to say. He says, hey, I don't know everything, but I'll have the best advisors, and we should start budgets from zero and build up what we actually need from there. Okay, that's Scott, Haley, Ramaswamy. Pence talks about Joe Biden belonging on the unemployment line. He talks about Bidenomics failing, that wages aren't keeping up. This is actually not entirely true. Wages did not keep up during the inflation we saw, but now real wages are actually above the rate of inflation. Again, that means things are still more expensive today, but it does mean that things are catching up again, hopefully, where people are finally making more money again than the rate of inflation. Hopefully that continues because we want people to make more money. 41 million, let's see here. Okay, sorry, this was 41 minutes in. Vivek, we've got what? Sorry, I can't read my notes correctly here. Okay, yeah, Vivek pulling out of China. Oh, yeah, this was a line. Okay, so Pence here says, wow, Vivek pulled out of China in 2018. This must have been around the same time you actually started participating and voting in elections. This is just a slam on Vivek in that he hasn't previously voted in as many previous elections as you would expect for somebody who ended up wanting to run for president. The audience didn't seem too optimistic about that. I think the audience saw that as a little bit ageist, but whatever. So Pence continues with make the government smaller, bring Obamacare back to the states, bring housing back to the states, and bring health and human services back to the states, as well as shut down the Department of Education, which is interesting because that's a Ramaswamy line. Okay, continuing on. Then we've talked about Nikki Burgum. A lot of talk about how, hey, we're helping the fight on the border. We're sending helicopters over. We are a productive state, but we need to be careful how we allocate subsidies because subsidies are being allocated poorly. But I think Burgum has good ideas. In case you don't know, he's the governor of North Dakota, but I don't think they come across as clearly to the average voter. So I think sometimes some of the things he says get lost. You've got Chris Christie coming out with the Trump insults again, saying, hey, we don't have Donald Trump, we have Donald Duck, because he's not here actually participating in this debate. Although many would argue Donald Trump doesn't need to be part of this debate because, basically Donald Trump's argument all along has been like, what do I need to debate them for? You know my record. I'll just tell you what I'm going to do, and then you can look at my record. What do I need to debate them for to get a platform? I have a platform. He literally does, Truth Social. But then he also gets a lot of media attention. Anyway, National Guard coming to the border to stop the fentanyl crisis is one of Chris Christie's argument. He complains that other people on the stage don't have foreign policy experience, but he doesn't technically either. People in Washington, right? Then we move on to DeSantis. The argument here from DeSantis is people in Washington are shutting down the American dream. Trump should be here. We need hard power around China to limit the expansion and growth of China. Hard power is, by the way, different from soft power. Soft power is deemed to be diplomatic. Hard power is like you put military installations in, you put ships in, you put missiles in Taiwan, you put defensive weapons in Taiwan. That's hard power versus soft power, which is negotiating. Speaking of which, I am teaching negotiating and how you can learn how to negotiate in my Noob vs. Pro crash courses. See those at meetkevin.com. We've got a price increase coming on Friday. They're on pre-sale, just $79 right now for all of these crash courses. They're smaller, more efficient, but very high-value courses. And we are raising money at that one-to-one valuation for House Hack, my real estate startup we're calling the Vanguard of real estate. Okay, continuing on, we've got DeSantis talking about going after Mexican drug cartels, bringing chip manufacturing back to the U.S. The irony about that is Biden is actually, and I'm not here in the Republican debate summary to talk of Biden, but Biden's bringing back a lot of chip manufacturing to the United States via either the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is definitely not the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's definitely going to increase inflation, well, my opinion. But anyway, you've got massive expansions coming from Taiwan Semiconductors, Intel. You've actually got Qcell, which is a German manufacturer of solar panels, coming to Georgia to grow crystalline for solar panels in America because of all the subsidies that are going to these. Now, in fairness, these subsidies are going to green rather than, all sorts of manufacturing, which is a big problem that Donald Trump has. DeSantis calls for lowering gas prices. He was hit by Nikki Haley actually, hit for wanting to ban fracking. You want to look up Executive Order 1912, Achieving More Now for Florida's Environment. This is basically an Everglades restoration executive order, and he actually campaigned for this, basically directing agencies to oppose offshore oil and gas activities off every coast in Florida and ban fracking in the state of Florida. He does go on, to argue that polls don't elect presidents, and don't worry about what the polls say, we're going to keep fighting. So this gives you an idea about the debate overall. There was a comment about Trump's border wall. I want to add a fact check here. Chris Christie says Trump only built 52 miles of a border wall. This is not the stat that I found. I found that Donald Trump built 80 miles of new wall and 452 miles of total wall exist, much of that which was deemed by Trump to be worthless and trivial, and therefore rebuilt by Donald Trump. So the absolute exact total of what Donald Trump built via the wall is probably to the tune of somewhere around hundreds of miles. It's just that the new section, it was only about 80 miles, and then many, many more miles were actually rebuilt, old portions where there were existing barricades or existing walls. Keep in mind that Donald Trump did also debate, didn't debate, he had a speech this evening. Donald Trump made it extremely clear in his presentation to an auto parts manufacturing company that with Biden is selling you out to China, that Biden is trying to kill the auto industry in favor of a Chinese-made electric vehicle industry. No talk about Tesla here, but argues that basically Biden is killing the U.S. auto industry, and United States auto workers should vote and endorse Donald Trump, vote for Donald Trump and endorse Donald Trump, because he believes he's going to make sure that automobiles will continue to be made in the United States and not in China. He wants vehicles to be made in America. He does spend a lot of time bagging on EVs, but does walk that back a little bit by arguing that, look, EVs are great for some people, maybe those who want to drive shorter distances. Ultimately, you should have the choice to buy if you want a gas car or an EV. That should be your choice. But our goal in America is to be energy independent and build vehicles with American-made labor and well-paid labor. He also argued that he didn't see anyone on stage of the Republican candidates who was a VP-style candidate. He says the radical left is trying to destroy internal combustion engine vehicles, and then he kind of goes into some history about talking about how he was able to negotiate discounts on the Air Force One, how he wants to ban sex changes for children, how on day one he's going to make sure vehicles in America are made in America. Again, never a mention of Tesla, although Tesla does manufacture a lot of vehicles in China. They've got some pretty big facilities up in Fremont, Cali, and Austin, Giga, Texas, as well as some of these solar fabs and battery fabs that they have in America as well. Not a lot of mention, though, of Tesla at all from really anyone.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.